Welcome to the National Union of Students Conference 2020 Election Hustings for National President. I'm your host, Kami Anzeram, and joining me today are some of your election candidates. Ayo Falana from the University of Wolverhampton Students' Union, please say hi.
Hi.
Larissa Kennedy from Warwick Students' Union, please say
hi.
hi. Nelly Chibarije from London South Bank University Students' Union, please say hi.
Hi.
Joshua Muirhead from the University of Stirling Students' Union, please say hi.
Hi.
And Erica Ramos from the National Union of Students, please say hi.
Hello, hello.
Welcome to you all. Unfortunately, Calvin Jantz from the University of Brighton Students' Union and James Butler from Warwick Students' Union couldn't be with us today. Before we get to the questions that you students want to ask your NUS national presidential hopefuls, we want to hear from the candidates to open proceedings. Why does each one of them want to stand as a candidate? Larissa, why do you want to be NUS president?
Oh, hi again. My name's Larissa. I'm 21 and I'm a student activist working on social justice and climate justice. The student movement's been my home for the past 5 years. Since college, I've organised against sexual violence as the Girl Guide who represented 500,000 girls and young women at 16 years old and co-developed a national strategy to tackle sexual harassment in schools. I was the 17-year-old whose voice wasn't being heard, so I fought for national policy on Vote 16 at the British Youth Council. Now that I'm halfway through my degree at Warwick, I look back on the first half of my studies and I'm spurred on by what we've achieved. Together, we've marched against student fees, and through the Black Students campaign, we fought racism on campus. I was the FemSoc president who kicked TERFs to the curb and brought trans students from the margins to the centre of our movement. I was the first Black woman sabbatical officer elected at my students' union ever, and the officer who created a legacy for the 2 Black women that followed me and the 2 who have just been elected to follow them. You've elected me once to serve on your National Executive Council, and now I ask you to elect me again, but as your national president. I will equip, energise and mobilise the grassroots of our movement to drive forward a vision of truly free, accessible and lifelong education. Our national union was on the forefront of mobilising against war and organising against apartheid. In the age of the climate catastrophe and ongoing global pandemic, we need a national president who has proven she can bring people together and organisations together to amplify the most marginalised and deliver the change that we need to see. This is what we can do together.
Larissa, thank you very much indeed for that intro. Next, I'd like to invite Nelly Chibarije to tell us why she thinks she should be the next NUS president. Nelly.
Thank you, Kemi. Hello, membership. My name is Nelly Chibarije, and I'm the first 2-term president at London South Bank Students' Union, the first re-elected president, and I'm also the first president to be elected in their first year. I also started a students' union at my alternative provider college, which once again made me the first ever president in that college. I have made changes for my students any and everywhere because education is something that I deeply care about. Moreover, having an environment in education which helps to support and advance you. So I initiated the petition on student loans, which gladly a couple of weeks ago resulted into an all-party parliamentary group at Westminster. Many of you nationally came to that meeting, and it makes me so proud to see us working together and achieving common goals and common issues that affect students on a national level. Although I am a students' union president, I have been working really hard to ensure that issues outside of my institution are also fixed. I would like you, last year I ran for NUS president and I came a very close second. So that shows that you trusted me You trusted me with the responsibility, but probably not enough. So what I did, I went away and did even more. I've delivered incredible things for my students and your students. I've worked with officers around, from Kingston to Brunel to, you name it. So this is the workings of a national president. My incredible stakeholder engagements have managed to secure my students some of the most excellent placements around. I've secured 500 placements for students. I've introduced new lanyards. I've fixed your timetable by introducing the Outlook integration, and it makes me proud to look around campus and see students using that function with or without Wi-Fi, among other things. So I would like you to trust an individual who is great with working with individuals, no matter what their political divide, no matter what institution they're from, no matter what your color is, and elect me as your national president, this time with more votes than last year. Thank you.
Nellie, thank you very much indeed for that. Next, Joshua Muirhead. Why would you like to be the next NUS president?
So hi there, my name's Josh Muirhead and I'm the current Vice President Communities at Stirling Student Union. During the last year I've worked on several issues within my union, and this includes gaining a fair rent deal for students and seeing a mass improvement to student accommodation, as well as an improvement to an enhancement fund so students from all backgrounds can access housing. Oh, sorry, I'm not the best public speaker. I've worked on improving my university's carbon footprint and overall actions on sustainability, pushing for the university to provide information sessions and support to our EU and international students, and that's just to name a few things. I believe my time as Vice President at Stirling has helped me to gain experience and knowledge that I can use as NUS President. I'm running to be the next NUS President because I believe that no matter who you are or where you're from, we all deserve the best opportunity to do well in our studies. I personally have experienced some of the first-hand horrid barriers that do exist for our students. And despite all that is already done, we need to go further to ensure that everyone has the best chance for success with their studies. And with your support, I'd love to tear those barriers down. And I want to work, if elected, to improve the strength of our nations, whether that be Scotland, Wales, or Northern Ireland and USI, the liberation groups for NUS, as well as work on issues that affect us all, from housing to transport and general sustainability. So I want to just fight to improve our movement, to push it forward to be the forefront of the education face of the UK. Thank you.
Joshua, thank you very much indeed for that. Next, I'd like to invite Erica Ramos. Erica, why would you like to be the next NUS president?
Hello, it is a pleasure to have the opportunity today to say a bit more about who I am and what I will do. We all remember a defining moment, and for me, it came when I was 20 years old. I made one of the biggest decisions of my life to pursue my studies in the UK. I arrived in London, I didn't know anybody, so I set up a society. My class didn't have access to the materials we needed to study, so I became a course rep. The waiting times to be seen by a mental health advisor was outrageous, so I stood to be an officer at my students' union. I was worried by the xenophobia after Brexit, so I got involved in the NUS International Students Campaign, and that's when I started to see NUS. And I didn't think that NUS was as good as it should be. It wasn't good enough on championing students' unions, it wasn't good enough in supporting elected officers, and it sure was not good enough on representing students. So that's why I stood to be Vice President Union Development. I was supported working recognition for apprentices. I've represented international students, and above all, I put harnessing the power of students' unions at the top of NUS's agenda. Now I'm starting to be president of NUS because the next 2 years will be a defining period for the UK, for young people, for students, and for our education system. It'll be a defining period for our members. We may as well say it is a challenging time to be a student leader. With relentless Brexit uncertainty, student unions and students under attack from the media, and no clear plan to averting the disaster of climate change. But it doesn't have to be this way because throughout history, students have changed the world and NUS has led the way. NUS can give power to shape the world, the power to make Britain a welcoming, compassionate, and kind place where education is valued and we take definitive action to address climate change. I've decided to stand for NUS president to make sure that we are at the heart of the debate, making sure that by 2022, we can be proud of the changes we've made. It's time to make NUS relevant, confident, and effective again. It's time to unleash the power of the student movement.
Erica Ramos, thank you very much indeed for that. And lastly, of the fifth contenders that we've got to speak to us today. Ayo Falana, why would you like to be the next NUS president?
Thank you, Kemi. My name is Ayo Falana, and I'm the current Union Affairs Officer at the University of Wolverhampton SU. Previously, I was the Vice President at University of East London. Through my past and previous experience, I've developed a good understanding of students in a cosmopolitan society like London and a quiet environment like Wolverhampton. I have helped to tackle campaigns and programs that are beneficial and meet student needs. Out of issues affecting students in the UK, I've always been tackling issues around fees, around payment attainment gap, and welfare, which are dear to my heart. On fees, I helped to tackle and sign the theft. I signed a letter against the theft in The Guardian in 2016, and I was part of the campaigns that marched forward on London streets. On payment attainment gap, I've launched a campaign at my university called the Believe, Belong and Achieve campaign. This campaign focuses around celebrating BAME students' success by highlighting their profiles of BAME students and stories, and they were presented in various ways, which was well attended by staff from various universities, as well from former NUS education officer. This campaign aim is to look into greater insight of BAME student perception and how these are linked to a sense of belonging at their various universities. I've also helped initiated a parliamentary form of government in my university by making all the cost rep to be part of the scrutiny committee. So it is one thing I hope to achieve in NUS, to make NUS more parliamentary type of government, whereby every university and every colleges have a representative on NUS. We should scrutinize NUS other than what we currently have. So thank you.
Thank you, Ayo, and thank you to all of the candidates. I'm sure the entire student electorate will agree that you've got an incredibly strong field there. So now to the questions, and we're going to invite Josh to respond first to the first question, which comes from the University of Birmingham. Everyone will get a chance to answer each question, but as I said, Josh is going to respond to this one first. I'll read it out. Beside the totem card, students are, for the most part, unaware of their local students' union and the National Union of Students. How will you connect with the students on the ground at universities and colleges across the UK and make the National Union of Students campaigns, ideals, and actions more relevant to them and their interests? So just to paraphrase that very, very briefly, how are you going to connect with students on the ground and make NUS campaigns, ideals, and actions more relevant to students and students' interests? That's from the University of Birmingham. Josh, could you respond first, please?
So I think from my experience, what I can say is that I always felt that NUS was this thing that was always far away. I think for my experience within Stirling in Scotland, we always had much more interaction with NUS Scotland than what we would have normally with NUS UK. However, that has to change, because for the NUS leadership, for the president, the two vice presidents of higher and further education, they need to be much more on the ground and representative and going to institutions rather than just small fleeting visits where it's just more of a wave and a smile and, oh, I'll see you at conference. So one of the first things I'd like to do is actually get on the ground and communicate with the sabbatical officers at colleges and universities, as well as alternative providers who are members of the NUS, to find out what their issues are, and then go and talk to the student bodies directly, because it's very easy to do it online or through other means, but really it's about finding out face to face what the real issues are and what we can do to change. And that's something I've always thought about that we should do. It's something I've done at Stirling, and it's something I would like to see in the national movement. Will it be time consuming? Yes, it would be, and it will be something that's difficult, but at the same time, going forward, I think it's the correct way, because that is the one way we can be held accountable to our mass membership. It's by being seen and being actually relatable and contactable. So I hope that's answered the question.
Thank you very much indeed, Josh. Erica, how are you going to connect with students?
So As we all know, NUS is currently in a transitional year and going through reform. And one of the things it is committed to do as part of that reform is to move from analog era to a more digital era. So the idea is to help students' unions boost their engagement with their students first. Talking to different students' leaders from different students' unions across the country, it was evident that students' unions struggle with student engagement, and this is due to the lack of resource and funding. So I will make sure to help students' unions first by building a case of all the great things students' unions do on their campus and in their local communities. We need to make sure that the vice chancellors and politicians across all nations and the communities that our institutions are in can see that the impact of students' unions have on individual members and wider society. Because together as students, students' unions, and NUS, we can give students the power to make a difference locally and nationally.
Erica, thank you very much indeed. Io, how are you going to connect with students around the country?
Thank you, Kemi. The way I'm going to connect with students across the country is to have, like I said earlier on in my introduction, is to have a more parliamentary NUS, because for students like me, I feel, even though my university is affiliated with NUS, I feel disaffiliated with NUS because I hardly get little or no support from NUS in my campaigns or whatever I want to do. But if you have a more parliamentary NUS, and what I mean by parliamentary NUS is to have 2 students at least from every university, every colleges on council, on NUS council, that will hold the officers to account. By that way, every university will know what's happening within the NUS, other than just having quite very few people holding the officers to account or the exec committee. To be honest, I don't even know the structure of the political of the democracy of NUS. But if we have a more parliamentary NUS, I believe we can connect the entire student body in the whole country, and that's the way I believe to go forward, which is properly written in my manifesto. Thank you.
Io, thank you very much indeed. More reform, it would sound. Io is arguing for there. Larissa, how are you going to connect with students around the country?
Apologies, mic wasn't quite working there. So thanks very much to the University of Birmingham Guild for the question there. I think it's a really pertinent one, because if Totem has taught us anything, it's that we need to drastically rethink the way we engage with students. For too many, NUS has become irrelevant and out of touch, but with 2 incredibly difficult years ahead, carving out what a post-Brexit Britain looks like for international students and those most impacted by the hostile environment, and with the precarity ahead for smaller specialist unions, as we navigate a sector crisis, students need a national union that reflects the issues that they're facing more than ever. We need an NUS that's fighting for students' voices to be heard in the uncertain times ahead, an NUS that is known, visible, and active in amplifying students' campaigns in colleges and universities in every region and nation in the UK, and an NUS that supports student campaigners and officers with the skills and resources they need to drive real success. And in that success, in seeing what's possible, NUS becomes relevant to those it represents. After seeing how the Black Students Campaign was steering the national movement to decolonise education, at a time when I was navigating these conversations on my campus and it was incredibly difficult, I saw a space to learn, to grow, and to contribute to the national agenda. No matter what the issue and no matter which union they're coming from, I want every student to feel that way about our national union.
Larissa, thank you very much indeed. And last but by no means least, Nelly, how are you going to connect better with students?
Thank you, Kemi, and thank you, Birmingham Guild, for the question. Well, the system's broken and it needs to be fixed. But luckily, I have already been doing this. So I'll continue doing what I'm doing right across from visiting campuses. So in 1 year alone, I've visited over 20 students' unions and colleges and universities, connecting with their officers and finding out from the ground what issues that they need taking forward or what issues we can work on together. I worked on the London Working Group where we were discussing how we can support our students within London with transport, you know, on a university meeting where we were discussing our a new member of our university group, Lambeth College. One of the things I first put out there was, why don't we work with TfL so that we can get some buses that, you know, people can hop on and off as long as you show your student ID, and other universities and colleges locally can buy into. And conversations with officers that was in the meeting at the London Working Group showed that this was something that they were all quite happy to take forward to their institutions. Outside of all of that, I've also invited officers into my own union. So 2 weeks ago, I hosted about 20 officers from different unions talking about, once again, mutual campaigns that we can work on together, how we can better support our students. You know, the issue with student finance has been really rife on my agenda from over a year ago, and having experienced systematic barriers in trying to attain an education and taking a very untraditional route for me to even get here, I completely understand the issues that students go through. And when you talk to people about NUS and they think it's just a totem card, I have been trying getting this message across. For instance, at my local co-op, I run into two students. One goes to Kingston and one goes to Solent. And one knew about the union and they were engaged. The other one knew absolutely nothing about it. I can assure you that's not the case now. So I will absolutely continue to do what I'm doing, engaging with students on a real level. And for unions can be toxic sometimes. And when my union was experiencing one of the most horrific times of our lives, I needed NUS to be by my side. They weren't there. I needed our officers to reach out to me and come and see us and say, hey, do you need any support? They weren't there. That will change when I'm national president, because I will ensure that I support these unions, not only because I've faced the same challenges and I know how difficult it is for an officer to effect change in their own union, but also because that I know that they're worth it and the money that they affiliate is worth this support and services. Thank you.
Nelly, thank you very much indeed for that. Indeed, thanks to all of you. A range of ideas then, some practical, some structural, some boots on the ground, some talking about further reform. So I want to come to Io to answer the next question first, which flows on from the first one. We are, of course, where we are in the political cycle. And this question comes from SOAS, the SOAS Students' Union. So to IO first, how should the National Union of Students engage with the new Conservative government to best benefit its members? So just to repeat that from SOAS, how should the National Union of Students engage with the new Conservative government to best benefit its students? Io.
Thank you, Kami. I think if my knowledge could serve me right, since 2016, we've been doing streets and bringing up placards to the government to say why we shouldn't be charged this X amount of fees. But however, the first thing I believe we should do is to look at what the Conservative government has in place for us. And the NUS and myself, if elected, should actually do a research and the statistics of what is beneficial for us, because the government doesn't believe in us carrying placards. They believe in statistics and research, and I believe we should work with them in a diplomatic way. And if we work with them in a diplomatic way, I believe we can work with them, because one thing I want to work with the Conservative government with is in terms of fees, in respect to fees, because the fees being charged for students is too much, and I want to work with them on that. Like I said, the first thing I will do is to go into research and let the government know why we shouldn't be charging our students this type of fees. I believe the government, the Conservative government, wants the best interest of students, but they just need to take priority, and the priority is the only thing that is missing. And what my job is to let them know this priority. And if I work with all the students in the UK after creating the parliamentary government, I believe we can do a strike. To be honest, the entire student body, we can go on a strike. That's my belief. And if they are not, if we work with them and it's not going the way I want, the way that is beneficial to students, not the way I want it to go, I believe the strike is the best option for me.
Io, thank you very much indeed. To Larissa next. The Conservative government fees and a strike. Do you think that the Conservative government is going to move on fees, and is a strike the best way to get them to move?
I think that's an excellent question. I want to thank SOAS for the original question and Kemi yourself for that follow-up. Because I think if we're not going to be expansive in our vision for kind of that truly free, accessible and lifelong education, then where do we have the space to truly drive that vision? I think we can learn from a lot of other organisations in this. Of course, there are steps we need to take along the way to drive that forward in a tangible way. But yes, I think we should still be pushing for movement on that in the long term. And in terms of what that looks like in progress, I think we can learn from the likes of an organisation like Crisis, where they have their long-term plan for homelessness. It lays out their long-term solutions beyond the government of the day and beyond current political favour, but it also means that their organisation's vital work in the short term is able to continue regardless of government changes. So we have that vision, but we also have the steps that we need to take towards that vision. In terms of whether a strike is the right perspective, I absolutely support strike action. I also think that there are other things that we can do to move towards not only free education, but all of the other things that we have on the agenda. And to develop that plan, I think in some ways I'm quite a unique candidate, bringing a lot of wealth of experience from other organisations. Within so many, I've worked alongside the government. For example, kind of with the Women and Equalities Committee on sexual harassment in schools. I've sat on government advisory panels to end FGM, child marriage, preventable maternal death. I'm a trustee of the British Youth Council. We work with the APPG for Youth. And we have the Youth Select Committee on knife crime. I think that my track record shows that I know when is best to work government and how to do that in a way that secures the results that we're looking for. But also when we need to be kind of banging on the door from the outside and building the power and resistance needed to force the hand of government in our direction, I'm ready to do that too. So it's those two sides of the coin, I think. I hope that answers the question.
Larissa, thank you very much. Nelly, next, how would the NUS, under your potential leadership, engage with the Conservative government in the interest of the benefits of students?
Kemi, the only way that NUS can engage with the Conservative government to deliver for students is by electing me as their national president. And here's my reasons why. Currently, NUS's factional fight is draining to the student movement. As a first-time delegate, I experienced that firsthand, and I was literally intimidated and scared for my life. You walk around universities and unions and you will hear the factional fights are absolutely draining and tiring to students. So you need to elect a president who is excellent at stakeholder engagement like I am. The only way I've managed to achieve things, the only way I know how to achieve my campaigns and win for students is via diplomacy. I speak well with individuals. I make incredible friendships, right from meeting, for instance, the education secretary, who is a Conservative, Gavin Williamson. I did not look at him as a Conservative. I've met the individual twice. As far as I'm concerned, I would talk to him the same way about student issues like I would any other leader. When I met Theresa May, for instance, I did not see a Conservative Prime Minister. What I saw was a female, powerful leader, and also slightly fragile woman who needs to be supported by the people that she's leading. So NUS needs a leader who will be able to do this for students, because individuals are not bad because of their political affiliations, you know. So to me, whether you're from this or that, or whether there's a new political party that's going to be created tomorrow, you will see me working excellently well with them, the same way that I have done with others, and I'll continue to do so. Thank you.
Nelly, thank you very much indeed. Josh, to you next. Obviously, a very different political context north of the border, but this, of course, is a national posting. So your thoughts on how best the NUS under your leadership would work, engage with the Conservative government?
I think one thing to remember is you're not just working with the Education Minister, you'll be working with the Minister for Education Secretary, the Minister for Universities. You'll have to work beyond just one singular ministry. So I think going forward, no matter what, it's having to engage with them. I happily admit to people I'm a massive critic of the current Conservative government, as well as the premiership of Boris Johnson. However, that doesn't matter. Going forward, we need to engage as it is the government of the day. So by doing this, it's about gaining trust. It's about understanding that we will go into discussions and negotiations on opposite sides. But it's about finding that middle ground that will work for students. So it's also, I think the saddest part about it is having to admit to the electorship that we could all, as candidates, promise the world, but realistically we have to go in saying that we will be getting stepping stones to the future. It's about gradually getting there and knowing that you're building on the work for future generations of students and future generations of officers. So I would work with the Conservative government the same way I would happily work with any governments of any party. So it's just that sad. I think it's that thing of understanding that they do have their own political viewpoint as an ideological based thing, but just stepping forward, it's leaving that at the door to say, right, what can we do? What can we do so that there's a better, safer future for students? And I think one prime example of that just now is the current crisis we're seeing with Corona. It's about defending international students' rights. It's about defending the students' rights for housing, for the right to not be evicted during a pandemic crisis. So it's about having these realistic and hard conversations and just admitting that there will be a middle ground, and that's probably where we have to aim for, rather than for our true massive aims. So yeah, that's how I would work with a Conservative government.
Joshua, thank you very much indeed. Now, Erica, your experience as an international student, which of course Josh just alluded to, was something you spoke about a minute ago. With your perspective, and a number of you obviously are international, but with your perspective, how do you think the NUS under your leadership should engage with the Conservative government?
100%, and I agree with Nellie's point that she made about factions, because there's a lot of fighting and bickering and squabbling about policies, and getting deep into party politics only creates division and does not get us anywhere. Because personally, as an international student, in my first time as a delegate in that room, it felt very overwhelming. So, and it scares off people like me, who just is quite new into the politics and doesn't understand. So I totally agree with Nellie in there. So that means that we need to make sure that we lead a movement that is functioning, efficient, and fierce. We need to make sure that we speak to whoever is in power in the government and not be afraid to stand up to and speak truth to power. We need to be honest and recognize that there are many areas that we will disagree on, but there are also areas where we can definitely work together and make positive change. Because, you know, and there's a lot of areas, so we need to be honest and recognize that there are many areas, like, you know, the battles aren't lost in the areas like Erasmus Plus, student mental health, the climate crisis, the attainment gap, prevent, the NHS surcharge. It's up to organizations like NUS to join the dots between students and governments, no matter what party they are, and make sure that we can present a winning case for the things our members care about. Because students are the future, and no government can ignore that, and no government will ignore us for too long anymore. Now is the time for NUS to be fighting and fierce, clear and concise, and speak truth to power.
Erica, thank you very much indeed. So I just want to get a sense of how activists you guys want to be, the five candidates that we have before us. And of course, students are no strangers to taking action of one kind or another. Something that Io mentioned in his response to this question is the prospect of strike. So I just want to quickly go round and get a sense from all of you, starting with Io. You mentioned strikes. Are you calling for a strike on fees, or are you suggesting that that is something that you could do if the government doesn't talk to you? And I'm going to ask everyone exactly the same question. Is this something in the back pocket, or is it something that you want to put front and center?
Oh, that's something in the back pocket. After doing all the necessary things that I would do, you know, I'll build my argument after research, after my statistics, and bring it up forward to government. But if anything is not changing on the card, and I'm pushing and nothing is changing, I think I'll go for strike as a second option.
Thank you, Larissa, where do you stand on activism and strikes around fees?
So I think to speak to direct action more generally, I think that it's important that we are upskilling our movement to both be doing the high level advocacy, the engagements with government, and the direct action that's necessary to drive the change that we often want to see. But that's why in my manifesto I've committed to a global rally for education. I think it's about bringing people together, being on the streets and at the table, and combining those methods to make sure that we achieve the end goals. So whether or not I support strikes, absolutely support strike action if that's what unions would like to do, but absolutely think that we need to be more as well-rounded as possible to tackle this issue.
Thank you, Larissa. Nelly, where do you stand?
Thank you, Kemi. I love a good strike. However, I don't believe that everything should be won via a strike. I think you save your best strike for the best fight. And I do appreciate that student funding and fees is an incredibly important issue. But I know that, for instance, in 2017, we nearly got somewhere with the petition that went round, millions of students who signed it to say we needed to decrease the fees to £3,000. And following that, when government agreed to discuss the petition, I rallied my students around so we can go and sit in on Parliament while they discuss us, because I believe, for instance, if you're in court and you're not there, you are not physically there, a decision's going to be made either way. But if you're sitting and listening, and even though you don't have a say in it, people are conscious of what decisions they make on you. And for a very brief moment, we nearly got somewhere. I shared this on my social media because at one point, Theresa May was discussing, yay, fees. However, that died down very quickly because of the political climate. But I think that as a realistic leader, if you're going to be national president, you have to be realistic about certain things. Yes, we want this. Yes, we want that. However, I know very well that majority of our students do not have the time to engage in a strike. Our students feel passionately about issues. However, send round a petition, they will sign it. Ask them, do a call for action to ask them to come and engage physically. They don't have that. We have 76% mature students on our campus, for instance. Nelly, and Nelly, it doesn't.
Thank you. Thank you, Nelly. I'm conscious that other people want to respond to this, and we've got a lot of questions that we need to get through as well. Josh, to you, very briefly, where do you stand on activism and strikes around fees?
I actually agree with Nelly. Strikes is a definite last resort. I think there is so much we can do with student activism based, whether that is less striking based protests and more just, there is other ways than direct action being the first point of call, or as I said, the second choice. I think we do have to look at how it would affect time for students because of and money and like caring issues. It's, for me, strikes will always have a part to play, but I think strikes are that last moment thing, that card you pull when you've just got nothing left. But I think as well, as just one thing if I can add very briefly, as national president, we have to remember that funding is very different across the UK, whether it's Wales, Northern Ireland, Scotland. So a national strike would have to be national, and it would have to affect everyone rather than just from the Westminster government. Sorry.
Understood. And of course, the funding situation in various parts of the country does differ. Erica, where do you stand?
So I agree with Ayo, Nelly, and Josh when it comes to, the direct approach for me is a little bit intimidating. So as an international student, for me, and you've got a whole lot of international students in the country, and striking and all of that can be deemed as a little bit intimidating because you're not familiar with the country and the politics. But if you are, but I think that the best approach for the situation, especially under a conservative government, is that we act pragmatically and diplomatically, like how it was mentioned here before. We need to make sure that we are engaging in conversations with local leaders, MPs, and etc., to make sure that our point is come across professionally and efficiently, and that they understand where we're coming from. And then if it all goes down to, they're not listening to us, then definitely I agree with Larissa that we should take definitive direct action and issue our demands. So that's, and for me, under my leadership, it's all about balance. We need to speak about the issues and make a case, and then speak truth to power. And then if it's not listened to, then Larissa's point on direct action would be my choice.
Thank you, everyone. From one question around direct action of one kind or another to the next, which comes from the Regent Academy of Fine Arts. And this is going to go to Nelly first. From the Regent Academy of Fine Arts, we've all seen the increase in climate change campaigning in the past year, ranging from pupils striking each month to large-scale sit-downs across towns and cities led by Extinction Rebellion, or XR as they're often called. Given the vandalism, anxiety and disruption caused by certain protesters, this is the words of the Regent Academy question, and the very real threat of climate change, should the National Union of Students be distancing or embracing Extinction Rebellion? So just that, to paraphrase that last bit, should the National Union of Students be distancing or embracing Extinction Rebellion? And Nelly, if you could respond first, please.
Thank you very much, Kemi, and thank you, Regent's College. I absolutely empathise with individuals whose well-being and anxiety was escalated by the Extinction Rebellion activity and even the vandalism. However, that should not put us off of we have a global climate emergency, and considering it's going to affect the youngest people the most, and NUS is representing young people and students across the country, I think they absolutely should be not distancing themselves from Extinction Rebellion, but actually embracing it and just looking at ways, I love doing things diplomatically, just looking at ways that we can get our point across without coming across as aggressive towards, especially, individuals that, for instance, a woman and a lady that was trying to get to hospital and they had to walk, a cancer patient, just because they couldn't get through the strike. So there are ways. And one thing I would do actually with regards to this, I would task NUS, if I'm elected as NUS president, I would task NUS with planting a tree for each individual member union that they have in the member unions. And of course, I'm happy to get stuck in and dig the planting holes for that.
Nelly, thank you very much indeed. Well, aside from planting trees, Joshua next. Do you think the NUS can ride both horses? Is it possible to both distance from the more direct action end of XR and embrace it at the same time?
I think it's interesting. I'm very fortunate. My counterpart, the Vice President of Education at Stirling, is actually the co-founder of Extinction Rebellion in Stirling. I think there's so many ways that we could embrace Extinction Rebellion, but in a way that won't harm students or the general public. I think it goes back to that concept of strikes and a direct action. We can do protests, we can do mass movements to encourage people to see that there is an issue, but I think when it comes to it, stop students and stop people being able to get to their jobs, which can affect their livelihood, or if, as the Nelly's example was, the hospital for the cancer patient, is definitely not something that we would like to push forward as an organisation. I think that's the thing. There's a real issue for climate change, and it's not just something that will affect communities far away, for example, whether it be in Polynesian islands. It's something that is affecting the UK, and with the rising sea levels and rising temperatures, it will affect the coastal communities all across the British Isles. So I think we can easily embrace Extinction Rebellion, but it has to be in a realistic way, something that, like I keep saying, doesn't harm our students. And I think it goes back to the idea of lobbying governments, lobbying multinational groups, so we do have a way that is beneficial for all, and it's a realistic stepping stone rather than blocking of motorways, which only alienates the population and effectively turns people against the activists. Thank you.
Joshua, thank you very much indeed. Erica, I know the question was posed as a binary, distance or embrace. We've heard two people say ride both horses. What do you say?
So, I mean, if we're going to talk about Extinction Rebellion itself, I think there are lessons to be learned from the climate justice campaigning last year. So looking at the positive side, Extinction Rebellion has managed to successfully put climate emergency front and center of local and national media. But at what cost? So we need to harness that energy within this debate, but we also need to be careful to not alienate people to our cause. The science is clear, but not everyone will be as quick to get it as we do. And as frustrating as that is, we need to be united in tackling the greatest issue of our generation. As Greta Thunberg said, our house is literally on fire. So there's a short space of time to fix this, and young people and students are leading the way. It's important we're working with other climate groups, as we've mentioned, it's been mentioned here, but making sure that we're not campaigning on our own. And we should have a campaign of our own as well, and which is clear and correct manner, which is inclusive and accessible to all.
Thank you, Erica. Io, the house is on fire. Extinction Rebellion have brought the fight to the front pages. How do you work with them?
I embrace it on a personal level, and as the National Union President, I embrace it 100%. I'll go for it. Climate change is one of the things that's been affecting our generation, and it's just a shame. But I know the vandalism and anxiety that comes with it. I'll still address that. I don't want vandalism. I don't want none of that. I just want just civil disobedience. That's what I want. And I embrace Extinction Rebellion 100%.
Thank you, Io. Larissa, do you embrace 100%? Do you have caveats?
Well, first of all, I want to thank the students at the Regent Academy for Fine Arts for the question. And in answer to that question, Kemi, I think much like the campaigning work of most organisations, there are things that we can be learning on both sides of the coin. I, of course, think that we should be distancing ourselves from the ways that racism pervades the organisation and the failure of XR to recognise that many of the campaigning activities that they engage in would pose a serious risk to climate justice activists of colour. And lots of the other critiques that XR have faced, as Nelly alluded to. Having said that, I do think we should be embracing the ways that XR is driving attitudinal change at scale and building that movement for change. So all of that is important to look at both sides of the coin, but I also think that our movement has much more space for synergy and for learning from the youth strikes for climate. And I love mobilising this movement on climate justice because a future shaped by young people and students is one that I want to see. I also take a lot of inspiration from student activists and officers who've been championing policy in their institutions to declare a climate emergency and setting measurable goals for how we address this. So kind of in short, I think we need a balanced, well-rounded approach that's empowering students at the grassroots, but also shaping the policy that means we can deliver holistically on climate justice.
Thank you, Larissa. And you make a good point about the representation within XR. And we've all seen the kind of the whitewashing of people of color, in particular women of color, in some aspects of that movement, which moves us on very smoothly to the next question, which is going to go to Erica first, from the Union of Kingston Students, about liberation. Liberation within the National Union of Students has been uncertain in recent years and has also experienced disproportionate representation in students' unions. What will you do to ensure all students are truly represented and that no one feels isolated? So that's from the Union of Kingston Students. Liberation. You first, Erica.
Thank you, Union of Kingston Students, for posing that very, very important question, because I agree. Liberation has definitely been pushed to the side and been experiencing disproportionate representation. This isn't a new problem, but it is time we fixed it. Because as an international woman of color, I have seen it firsthand, and I have firsthand experience of prejudice and discrimination. It's why I've always put liberation front and center in the work that I've done, because as a SAB, I worked with liberation groups to tackle gender-based violence. I raised funds for the HIV charity alongside our LGBT plus student community, and I led the work in Barnet for misogyny to be treated by the police as a hate crime. So a huge strength of our movement is that it is accommodating to all of those backgrounds and allowing liberated groups opportunities for leadership. It is arguably our biggest strength when it comes to our policies, because our policies are inclusive and forward-thinking. I will help build a case for all the great things liberation student leaders are doing in their students' unions and on their campuses, and advocate to secure more funding for students' unions to be able to have resources to support their liberation officers and groups and effectively deliver their campaigns. And I will deliver definitely and work closely with the Vice President of Liberation to make sure the NUS delivers liberation work effectively. Because to be clear, if I am elected as NUS president, I will work tirelessly to make sure that NUS is able to bring back fully resourced liberation campaigns led by the full-time officers in 2 years' time.
Erica, thank you very much indeed. Io, to you now. Liberation, how are you going to make sure that all students are fully and properly represented in the NUS?
Thank you, Kami, and thank you, Kirsten Student Union. Number one thing, I will use an example to explain my point here. I wanted to be an international officer when I wanted to contest in the NUS, but when I asked about the international officer, I was told that it has been cancelled or there is no more international officer again. So I was so shocked, to hear that, and I was so sad about that. Because NUS wouldn't be nothing without outward-facing campaigns and liberation officer representing Black, LGBTQ, trans, disabled women and international students. And I wouldn't want to lead a union like that, just having one liberation officer. I want an NUS with other liberation officer, which is clearly written in my manifesto. I want an NUS with liberation officer, and I'm so keen on that. I'm passionate about that as well. So thank you.
Io, thank you very much indeed. Larissa.
I just want to thank the Union of Kingston Students for raising a question that's really close to my heart. Without the Black Students campaign and the Women's campaign, I can honestly say I would not be sitting here and running for president today. The liberation campaigns are such a vital part of the work that NUS does. And I think it serves remembering in a time like this that none of the liberation campaigns came easily. They were hard fought for by our respective communities and our allies. And so in the spirit of that legacy, we can fight once again to restore all 5 liberation officers and the full resourcing that they require so that all students feel fully represented. But in terms of what we can do in the meantime, I think we need to address that representation and engagement properly over the next 2 years. And as your national president, I would work closely with student activists across the board to make sure that their priorities are tied in with the priorities of our national union. I'll make every resource I can available to these groups so their demands and needs do not fall by the wayside. Liberation campaigns were my route into activism as a student within this movement, and the route for so many of us to learn more about the world around us, to articulate our experiences, and to realise our power to drive change. And believe me, my commitment to that is wholeheartedly strong. And in this time, we truly need a president that is going to put liberation at the heart of everything we do and at the core of our movement. And that's what I'm committing to do.
Thank you, Larissa. Nelly, will you put liberation at the core of your presidency?
Absolutely, Cami. And thank you, Kingston, for submitting this question. Most recently, when we had the general meeting for us to vote on whether to restore liberations or not, I consulted with a few unions to see how that can affect my vote, because not everybody had an opportunity to go. And it was very clear from everybody I spoke to that they wanted liberations back, and so do I. However, I have to make one thing clear, that as national president, I will ensure that liberations are fully restored. However, we need to ensure that we don't break liberations the way we did. So as a Black student, We haven't had a Black Students Officer in my union for 3 years running. And so as a Black BAME president, I was automatically sent for the Black Liberation Conference every year. However, I decided very quickly not to return there because A, I didn't feel supported. B, it was so hostile. Once again, like I said, the factional ball in NUS is breaking us and breaking our students and intimidating them and stopping them from engaging. So that has to be a thing. However, what I've done in my own union, for instance, from introducing gender pronoun ID cards for staff and students, introducing the first ever racial equality training for staff and students, encouraging our union to send people to the Auschwitz concentration camp every year as part of the Holocaust Educational Trust, fundraising money for Metro, a charity that supports LGBTQ students under the age of 26, and apparently I raised the most money they've seen in my institution in a day than they had altogether, and right through to working with the Ugandan embassy on supporting international students, particularly at a time where we've Brexited and the Erasmus program is at stake, and we're unsure what's going to happen. So some of my conversations have been around introducing a proper Commonwealth exchange program, which has nothing to do with Brexit. Right? And conversations are actually being taken very seriously. So we need to continue liberations. I mean, you cannot do without liberations, but we have to ensure it's not a hostile environment. And when we have, for instance, a parents and carers support, that the individual in charge of that does not exclude certain parents and carers because some are more worthy than others because of political factions. That's my stance. Thank you.
An interesting overview there of the wider social and political context. Josh, Liberation, NUS, how will you ensure that everybody's welcome?
I think for me, being a member of the LGBT community, it's liberations in everything we do. And it's not about, for me, it's not about talking on behalf of groups. It would be definitely going to those groups and asking what I could do to support them. I was one of the people who voted to continue the funding of the liberation campaigns, and I think for me it's a worry because of what we do see in society, and something that Nelly said when you look at Brexit and how that's affected our liberation groups. If you look at obviously our current crisis with Corona, we are seeing a horrible rise in racism. Actually, during this, been receiving emails about racist incidents just off my university campus. It's something that really makes me angry. The lack of support our students do receive, and that's across whether individuals are from our BAME, LGBTQ+, trans, disabled, or who are women if they're international. For me, it's about going to these communities, these students and their officers and saying, what can I do? Please, you basically use me to do what you need. And that's something I've done this year as a sabbatical officer, and it's something, if I was elected as national president, I would continue doing, because it is that thing. It's very easy for me to sit in my privilege and just say, oh well, it's not a problem, but it is a problem. If anything, it's about using the privilege that I have so it isn't a problem for people. It's just basically, it's about listening to those communities and going forward.
Josh, thank you very much indeed. So we've got time for one quick fire question, and I'm going to get you all just to respond quickly in 20 or 30 seconds on another matter of inclusion, really, really important one. A question from Derwent College students, the student union. And we're going to go to Larissa first, but briefly, if you will, because we've only got about 4 or 5 minutes left, guys. With more student unions from specialist colleges joining at the NUS, how do you think you'll support them to be involved in NUS democracy and events, given their wide range of learning difficulties and disabilities? So a question from Derwent College, how to extend liberation and inclusion to take account of new colleges, learning difficulties and disability. To Larissa first, and briefly, if you would.
Thanks so much to students at Derwent College, and I'm going to try and get through this answer quickly because it's such an important and expansive one. But I think this needs a multi-pronged approach to make this more accessible to students from specialist colleges, whether that's moving towards more standardised terminology across the sector, addressing the disproportionately high costs that disabled student adjustments and the unions that represent them are facing, continuing the reform to NUS's communications and ways of working to make sure that we continue the great work of the Disabled Students Campaign on accessibility, digital and plain language uses, recognising kind of at the moment we're not where we need to be across students' unions, so making sure that there are routes for disabled students to access NUS outside of their SUs, but also addressing those spaces that we're championing inclusivity in, where we're advocating. So lobbying the Office for Students, the Department for Education, to be recognising and amplifying the voices of students' unions. They're rarely ever invited to sector roundtables, so making sure that that's more on the table. But also as a non-disabled student myself, making sure that I'm actively listening to those voices and including them in conversations. Sorry that was so fast. We've been told we only have a couple of minutes.
Thank you, Larissa. Nelly, briefly, if you will, diversity, inclusion in terms of learning difficulties and disability.
Absolutely. NUS needs to encourage more of these specialist colleges to join. And in this case, with regards to Durham, thank you for such a beautiful question. Durham are doing incredibly well. I mean, they have Ofsted outstanding right through to incredible support opportunities for their students to gain work within the community and employment opportunities, all the way down to sport, establishing relationships with sports clubs all throughout Shrewsbury, just so their students can have a better. So in any case, NUS could learn a lot from Durham College. However, moving forward, in order for Durham and institutions like Durham to continue doing the incredible work that they do for their students, then NUS needs to support them on a national, to give them a national voice, all the way from lobbying government to make sure that they're more included. I'm happy to answer this question by email after that because I know we haven't got long. Thank you.
Great, Josh.
I think definitely NUS, as well as the entire university and college sector, needs to drastically improve on its accessibility. It's something that is becoming much more apparent across the range of issues students face within disability, whether it's a physical disability, whether it is a learning disability. It's about basically making it as accessible for all students, and something we'd be directly communicating with the colleges like that, like Derwin, and working with them to say, right, what can we do to improve ourselves? It's something this year I've managed to talk to peers a bit about accessibility as the current disabled officer. We're far from perfect, but it's about getting close to perfection as possible, and listening to these students is the first thing. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Josh. Erica.
So as Vice President Union Development this year, I had the privilege and the honor to speak closely with small specialist unions who very much have vocally said, and I agreed, that in the past they have been ignored by full-time officers, and I have been speaking to them constantly. And how can we make sure that the NUS is fully engaging with them and developing them and helping with them with the resources, and also we need to speak closely with the disabled students campaign, to get that expertise and merge the charity and the union development side together to make sure that we are supporting those small specialist unions in particular for accessibility. Thank you.
Erica, thank you. Io, you have the last word on the last question.
Thank you very much, Kemi and Darren Coalition and Union. I'll work closely with every union to make sure there's direct communication, both from the NUS staff and the executive officer. For myself, as a typical student union, I would have loved more support from officers, executive officers now to be precise, staff of the NUS in running campaigns. And I will stretch this forward to newly members of the new colleges and current college on the NUS, and that's why I will do direct communication with them and direct visit as well to those unions as well, physical visits and communications, which is very key.
Thank you. That is all time. That is all we've got time for today in this hustings for the 2020 presidential election. Thank you very much indeed for watching. And of course, thank you to all our candidates. So thank you, Io.
Thank you, Kami.
Thank you, Larissa.
Thanks very much.
And thank you, Nelly.
Thank you, Kami.
And thank you, Joshua.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you.
And thank you, Erica.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
There are, of course, two more candidates standing, James Butler and Calvin Jantz, who couldn't join us for this hustings. Remember to vote.